Here we have a D flip-flop, which is made out of smaller D latches, which is just a modified SR latch, right? And and just like the SR flip-flop, we have this issue in the simulation where these outputs come out as errors, and we can actually just cycle the clock, and that will actually initialize it. Or force it to have a value. And once again, it's probably better to use these D flip-flops, but I wanted to show the structure of how it's built on latches, and there's no latch options in the in Logisim. So anyway, let's play with this guy. So we go back to our booger picker, and so we know that the D flip-flop is an edge trigger device, and this is a positive edge trigger device. So when the clock is a 0, we see that this inverter makes it so this latch here sees the clock as a 1, and so that means that it can write to its heart's content, right? 1, 0, and you can see the output just changes. But the slave does nothing, right? The slave doesn't change because it sees a clock signal of a 0 because of the second inverter. Now, if we want to write, all we have to see is a rising edge, or a 0 transition to a 1. And there we go. So now that's where we're at. And just to show that it's on the edge, right, I should be able to move D, and as D moves around, the slave or the master, neither of them change. So that truly is an edge trigger and not a level triggered device. Just real quick, let's actually modify this guy. Let's take this inverter out, and what we should see is a negative edge trigger device, so a transition from 1 to 0. So here, on a 1, we're allowed to write the master, and so we're going to write it to a 1. And then as the clock transitions from a 1 to a 0, or the negative edge, the slave is written. And then as we move our D around, once again we see this characteristic where neither the master or the slave changes. So D flip-flops are pretty cool. Like I've said multiple times, D devices are my preference because they only have one input. And being able to change the way they're triggered, right, positive edge or negative edge triggered, can be really helpful because sometimes you might need to have that alternating fashion where some devices change on the positive edge of a clock and some of them change on the negative edge. So there we go.